Hey everybody, this is Kenny with another edition of the Yak with MAC. Silence. Leaders. Today I talk about the value of being quiet and just listening. Listen in. Hey there everybody, this is Kenny with another edition of the Yak with MAC. We're right smack dab just about in the middle of summer. Hope you are having a great summer. Hope you're having a great selling if you're in sales. Hope you're having a great support if you are in care. Wherever you're at, hopefully you're having a great summer and really adjusting to a little bit of life after COVID. Hopefully it stays that way. Fingers crossed on everything. So leaders, this is a place to come to for you to get encouraged, because that's what I'm going to do for the next 10 minutes or so. I'm going to do that by telling a quick story and then giving some advice. So hopefully you are doing something 10, 15 minutes a day to develop yourself so that you can become a great leader and a great influencer. There are so many great resources out there for us. Career Fest is coming up. Hopefully you have saw some of that information out on T Nation and you take advantage of that, because it's Career Fest is for you. It's absolutely for you, and it's for your people also to develop, but you can't develop your people unless you're developing you. So make sure you are doing that and you take part in Career Fest coming right around the corner. Been talking about this for a while, or as a company we've been talking about this for a while, and it's great. Okay, I'm going to tell you something today. This is advice that I have learned the hard way over the years, and that is you just need to sometimes be quiet. You just need to keep quiet sometimes. Just shut the mouth and just listen. Shut the mouth and just take in what's happening, whether it's in your store, whether it's in your office, within your realm, to just figure out what the culture is like. I'm going to tell a story from a few years ago where I really learned that the hard way. And even today, I still have to continue to tell myself, keep quiet and listen. Whether it's in my family life, whether it's in my work life, I have to still tell myself to keep quiet. Just listen, observe, and then respond. So some of you that know me have heard this story before. So if you're watching this and you know this story, just bear with me, because this is the best way I can highlight it. A few years ago, at around 1 o'clock in the morning, through a lot of different circumstances, in my house, we had been doing a lot of different construction, and we had a couple of holes that we didn't think were that big going into our attic. Every once in a while, a squirrel would get in there. That's a bad thing, but they would get scared right out. Well, we had a different type of critter in there that we weren't aware of until my daughter calls me from the other side of the house at around 1:30 in the morning. She calls me. Thank goodness I pick up my phone. I'm like, Kira, you okay? I'm in a little bit of a panic because why is my daughter calling me? I knew she was home. And she's whispering. She's saying, Daddy, whatever we think was up in the attic has somehow made its way into the house. It's trying to get into my room. I was like, a squirrel? She's like, I'm not sure what it was. So immediately I threw down the phone. Immediately I went down the hallway, started turning on the lights, and all of a sudden I'm face to face with a raccoon. Yes, a pretty large raccoon. Now this wasn't a vicious raccoon at all. This was a raccoon that was terrified. That was probably stuck up there for a few days, had figured out how to get down, waited till it got dark in the middle of the night, got down, and then it was like, now what? So it's in my house, it's in my kitchen, and what I start to do is I start to yell. I pick up a big 2x4 that I use to close my back door, and I wasn't going to hit or harm this animal, so don't think this story's going to end bad. But I picked up the 2x4 and I start banging it. I'm starting to yell and just trying to scare this raccoon, and I succeeded. The raccoon got really scared, jumped on my kitchen counter, and then placed itself on the top of one of my kitchen cabinets all the way in the corner as far as it could get to, and then just proceeded to just stare at me every few minutes, just stare at me. So I went over, there was a door that's near that cabinet, and I opened up the door, and then I'm continuing to yell, and I'm continuing to toss some towels and stuff like that at it to try to scare it. But I think maybe it was so scared it just like stayed there. And it just kept staring at me. So this went on for about 15, 20 minutes. Now my daughter, very, very smart, she thought to call animal control at 1:30 in the morning. And guess what? Animal control picked up. And the guy said, hey, I can't get there. I'm in another town, Comac, if you're here in New York, which is about a half hour away from where I live. I can't get there because I'm chasing a bat in somebody's house. Okay, so some people have worse situations than you. I'm thinking my raccoon is bad. Can you imagine a bat in your house? Woo! Okay, let me get back on track here. So, but I'm still yelling. I'm still hollering. I'm still trying to scare this raccoon out my house. And as my daughter is talking to this animal control expert, he stops my daughter and he says, hey, who is that that's yelling? And she said, it's my dad. He's trying to scare the raccoon out of the house. He tells my daughter that, hey, that is not going to work. Tell your dad to do this. If the door is open, tell him to sit down and shut up. And tell him to just have silence in the house. I guarantee you in 15 to 20 minutes, that raccoon is going to hop down off that counter, off that shelf that it was at, and is going to slowly make its way out of your house. That's all that raccoon wants to do. So my daughter tells me that. And I'm like, what? And I got all this adrenaline running through. I'm thinking I still have to yell. I'm like, took a deep breath, and I sat down. And I waited. And I waited. And I waited. And sure enough, in silence, in about 15 minutes, that raccoon stared at me, looked at the door, slowly made its way down, slowly walked out the door. Before it walked out the door, though, it looked at me and it was like, I'll see you on the block. No, it didn't do that. I'm kidding. But it did slowly, it did give me a look as it went out just to make sure I probably wasn't going to chase it as it jumped down. I was so relieved. I was like, wow, that worked. That worked. The guy called back, the animal control expert, he called back at 7 in the morning. He called my daughter and asked just to follow up, hey, do you guys still need me out there? Is that raccoon still in the house? Imagine if it had still been in the house all night. And my daughter said no. And he said, well, what worked? Exactly what you said worked, for my dad to be quiet. So, that is an absolute true story. It happened maybe about 3-4 years ago now. But that's the best way I can illustrate you as a leader sometimes need to sit down and really be quiet, because as a leader, we sometimes don't have patience. We want things to happen right away. There's pressure for us to make things happen right away. But sometimes making things happen right away calls for patience and calls for us to figure out what are those long-term solutions to move my team forward. If you are constantly just running around every single day and yelling and hollering like a maniac like I was that night, you're going to miss stuff. You're going to miss what the culture is on your team, and you're not going to be a good observer of human behavior on what exactly is going on your team. And if you don't know those things, how can you coach then to it? So be a great observer on your team, and the way you can do that is by being quiet. And I think I'm just going to call this podcast Be Quiet. The Quiet Place, right? If you've seen that movie, it's a great movie. The second one was just as good as the first, in my opinion. But you have to really be able to be quiet and really observe. And we struggle with that as leaders. Why? Because we're taught that we have to solve every single problem by going in and talking and solving every single problem. Well, that's true in some situations, because I think we do have to ask a lot of questions. So that's my other piece of advice. Instead of tell right away, make sure you're asking a lot of questions. But how do you know the right questions to ask unless you are slowing down and you are silent and you just watch and you just observe and you resist that temptation to jump in right away? It took every fiber of my being at now 2 a.m. in the morning to not continue to holler and toss soft things. I didn't toss anything hard at this raccoon, but toss soft things to try to scare it out. And I'm like, oh, get out, get out. I'm Kenny, who are you? Get out. It took every fiber of my being to sit down and do what turned out to be the right thing, and that was take some moments of silence. And then I had to be patient because I'm like, okay, it's been 15 minutes. Raccoon's still sitting up there. This ain't working, Kira. Kira's my daughter. And I'm like, hey, it did work, right? You have to be silent. When you're silent, you check out how your team interacts with each other. Don't think that that's not vitally important, how they interact with each other, because the way they treat each other is also going to be indicative of the way they treat either internal or external customers. So you have to observe how they interact. You have to observe their behavior patterns and really observe it to a very, very deep length. Like, I mean, hey, I saw you make eye contact with that customer. That was great. And I saw you stand shoulder to shoulder with them. That was great. But I saw you talking to the screen when you were typing things in. That's something that you can change. How can you change that? So that's how granular you have to be when you're observing human behavior. You're not going to be able to get there at all unless you slow down, you're patient, and you shut up. And you just be quiet for a while. And you just keep your mouth closed and just listen in. Sounds basic, but as leaders in our fast-paced environment, I know that it's not. So that's my challenge to you today. We're going to get ready to wrap up. And so 10 minutes a day, leaders, that's that quiet time too, where you slow down and you give yourself back some time, because nobody is more important for development than you. And you have to feel that way about you. I know all of you out there as leaders, as great leaders, are very selfless. You're totally worried about your people. But remember the oxygen mask, right, on the airplane thing. You can't help somebody else if you're not helping yourself. So Career Fest is very important, and you've got to develop yourself. But silence. Remember my raccoon story. If I hadn't sat down, and I'd probably still be chasing that raccoon around my house a couple of years later, right? All right, let's wrap up. I got some great stuff coming, and we'll continue to feed you with some great knowledge drops and great inspiration. I hope you find it great. I'm saying it's great, right? And that's me. Anyway, this is Kenny. This has been the Yak with Mac. We will talk to you next week.